Welcome to this week's edition of the 6-5. I'm Patrick Moorhead with Moor Insights Strategy, and I am joined by my awesome co-host, Daniel Newman of Futurum Research. The 6-5 represents 6 topics for 5 minutes each. No news, because you can get that anywhere else, but a whole lot of analysis. But before we jump in, I want to say, hello, Daniel. How are you? It's Friday. It's been too long since we've done a recording, but I think we've both been super busy in the sweltering heat here.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week, Pat, but the good news is we come back together and there's too many things for the 6-5. Some weeks we're trying to figure out what are the 6 topics we want to analyze, and other weeks we're trying to figure out how do we take 16 topics and pick 6. And so hopefully we can just do more of these in the future. But for now, I think we got a great show and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, let's dive in. So first topic, Qualcomm defeats the FTC at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think in both of our opinions, another defeat for Apple. Gosh, it was kind of a surprise. I didn't expect this for maybe the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pat, for our audience, I'm just going to quickly do what we forgot to do. But remember, everybody, because we are talking about publicly traded companies and stocks throughout this episode, this is for information and entertainment purposes only. So do not trade or buy any stock because of anything we say. But listen closely, because we've got some really interesting perspectives, we believe. Yeah, Pat, the FTC overturn was crazy. And speaking of stocks, you actually saw an immediate northbound line on Qualcomm when this happened. So, for everybody that doesn't remember, essentially a year ago or last year, Judge Lucy Koh of the federal courts in California ruled against Qualcomm, basically asserting that the company was going to have to renegotiate its licensing agreements with almost all of its customers. And it was accused of charging too much. Essentially, their model was told that Qualcomm was making too much money on every device by making its patent portfolio available. And specifically, companies like Huawei and Apple had been very outspoken and put a lot of pressure on the federal courts and on the FTC to come down on Qualcomm. So again, not news, but the news here is this: by overturning this, the decision was never should have gone against Qualcomm. That's my immediate assessment. Yeah. The burden of proof never showed Qualcomm doing harm. Essentially, for everyone out there that does not know this, for about the price of a charger for your iPhone, Qualcomm makes available its entire patent portfolio. And that's a ton of different capabilities, everything from things like the way you use a navigation to security, the way you open up your device. And they literally have thousands of patents that influence the way you utilize your mobile device day in and day out. And Pat, I don't want to hog all the time here, but I was really pleased to see this because one major concern that I have is that companies that invest in innovation, in research and development, which Qualcomm is perhaps the personification here in America of a company that makes massive investments in this area, I do not want to see our country become one that's punitive towards organizations that innovate. We will actually, in the long run, suffer. So yes, in the short run, companies like Apple can profit large volumes by paying less for intellectual property and not being on the hook for spending and investing. But in the long run, Pat, we would suffer. We would suffer because no one would want to invest in innovation. Everybody would just wait for others and then take advantage of it, a lot like what we see in China with intellectual property constantly being taken advantage of, and why a lot of people don't want to develop it in that particular region.
Yeah, so Daniel, I'm glad you added that, and it is super important. I think certain lobbyists paid for by certain companies, technology companies, are trying to convince people that there's something wrong with licensing it. Because, if you don't patent something and licensing, you're keeping all of your intellectual property and your secrets to yourself, and other companies couldn't use it. On the other hand, you have companies like Qualcomm who make multi-billion-dollar investments 10 years before a widget that has that intellectual property or their IP enables get out and people start making money. We've also conflagrated the term R&D. R&D we love to talk about, but R is different from D. R is risky, R is longer term, and sometimes does not have line of sight to a product that is a complete failure, which the D, the development, is line of sight 2-3 years out, leveraging typically somebody else's IP to create and sell something. And that's what makes this industry go around. And I would say the US and global economy at this point, now that technology is such a big piece of that.
And Pat, I'd add one thing, and by the way, that word, I don't even know, I can't repeat it, conflagulated. I feel a little smarter than I did when I started this show. This, for the first time in years, has relieved a significant headwind that Qualcomm has faced, both in terms of its market valuation and its ability to function and operate at its full capacity. People have been worried. All this regulation, and it wasn't just the FTC, but we've had European, we've had China, we've had Apple. I mean, the company has finally been given a good name. It's right now, for this moment in time, and it's not just about mobile devices. It's about 5G, though. It's about IoT. It's about automotive. It's about AI. The company, like you said, Pat, invests in the R, and it charges for that, but it makes massive investments and then takes small, voluminous returns for all the risk it takes. And it can do that now. And basically the federal courts granted a runway for Qualcomm to finally operate and said, you know what, Qualcomm, your model is good. Please proceed.
That's right. Daniel, good analysis there. Let's jump to the next topic. Microsoft officially announced pricing and availability for its Surface Duo. Surface Duo is a dual display Android device. It's $13.99 and it's available on September 10th, and it's orderable right now. Let's get into the analysis. So I've been spending just an incredible amount of time on these. As you know, Daniel, my early background in the early part of my career, 30 years ago, started in devices. And the Duo is super exciting. First of all, it's targeted at Microsoft fans who want to be the most productive. Don't confuse this with soccer dads, stay-at-home dads who aren't really interested in ultimate productivity and are more interested in taking pictures of their kids playing soccer and stuff like that. Now, sure, you can take pictures with this thing, but primarily, if you want to get stuff done, I think you want to check out this phone. So first of all, a lot of hardcore people who try to get work done, they have multi-monitors displays. I have 3 right now. I'm afraid to ask you, Daniel, how many you have right now. Probably a lot. Looking at you, right? We are researching something on one display. We're doing calendar on the other. I leave my calendar open. That's all one display does. And if you carry that motif, that use case over to the Duo, that's exactly the way to think about it, where most Microsoft apps have been optimized for this environment. You span something like Outlook, and oh my gosh, you've got calendar on the right, you have Outlook on the left. You click on an email, and boom, that email on the right screen opens up. Amazon, I'm a huge Kindle reader. Guess what? It operates just like a book. Left page on the left, right page on the right, turn the page, and it's pretty incredible. So from a productivity use case point of view, targeted at Microsoft fans, I am pretty bullish on this. This is the beginning and not the end. I actually think compared to the Surface PC line, it will have quicker success. Because if you remember, first 3 or 4 years of Surface was pretty rocky until they got to Surface Pro. And then it really took off. And I think everybody in the industry gives Microsoft credit for bridging the gap, not just slapping a notebook and a tablet together, but coming up with a different product segment. So I'm super. I cannot wait to do a long-term review, but I'm super excited.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's it's a very interesting area. I'm on my Surface Book 3 as we speak. I have multiple Surfaces. It's been very fun to watch Microsoft re-enter the hardware business and do it with a lot of cachet and a lot of desire to be a premium product and a premium both look, feel, and function. I am interested in getting my hands on this thing. I look at it because you've been a big Fold guy. You talked a lot about Fold. And I kind of see this fitting in a very similar category. Now, the good news is Microsoft's coming in at a much more aggressive price. So for people, you're literally talking about a 2x price on the retail side, on the list price.
Well, if you fully configure an iPhone, you're up at $12.99.
Yeah.
Right? So but it's in the street. This is a premium phone.
It's a premium device with high productivity that can be bought for the price of most traditional premium tier smartphones. And it's got a lot of the capabilities that have intrigued us and you specifically about Fold, which you've spent a lot of time with. Now, both are awesome devices. So I'm certainly not knocking one and saying, I'm saying, but competition breeds innovation. Competition breeds excitement. It's going to be very interesting, Pat, to watch the market. You've got more premium tier products being made available. And the loser in all this, if you ask me, will be Apple. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take big chunks and big bites, but there is a certain part of the audience that have been using the big Apple phones that are going to look at this and be like, this is way more awesome for the way I work.
Yeah, that's good insights, Daniel. It was interesting. And I finally got it when I looked at it. I was thinking this was similar to the Galaxy Fold, but what hit me is the use case is dramatically different.
Interesting.
I want to get my hands on it beforehand, but it is 2 screens versus 1. And I know you can window on the Fold, and I do it a little bit, but I have to tell you, 99% of the time I'm using that Fold with the big contiguous planar screen. So, Daniel, let's dive into the third topic here, Intel Architecture Day. We got a background of a company that is crushing it the last 4 quarters in earnings, 20% upsides in revenue, particularly on the data center side. But at the end of their last earnings, 7-nanometer slip for 6 months, their stock goes down 20%, and they get hammered. And now we have Architecture Day that both you and I attended.
Yeah, it was a very interesting day, Pat. First of all, it was the ultimate day for nerds. We try to synthesize stuff and make this sensible for a broader community of business leaders and industry. But if you really like to get under the hood and talk transistors and talk performance per watt and all that good stuff, this was your event. But Pat, here's the thing, you hit it on the head. Intel can no longer just get away with great business performance. The spreadsheets alone are not enough. When you're in semiconductors, innovation and the ability to lead is a big premium in terms of market value. Now, Intel still has a massive share in server. It has a very significant share in client and desktop, but in some areas it has slipped. It has slipped in terms of leading process technology in notebooks. It has slipped in terms of leading in certain parts of server, in terms of hitting the 7-nanometer first. Hasn't necessarily cost a market share. And the company has slipped in terms of making a concrete AI strategy that the market can respond to and buy against. And so, well, you're 30 years in semiconductor, you could probably talk a little bit more about the nerdier parts of all this, Pat, than I can. But my assessment came down to a couple of things, and I'd love to get your take on this. My assessment is that Intel has a roadmap that puts the company in a position to get back into a leadership role. It can get back into a leadership role in CPUs and desktops. It can get back into, improve and continue to maintain its leadership role in server. And on the AI side, the company can define itself to find its niche. It's hard with what NVIDIA has been able to accomplish to just say, we're going to snap a finger and Intel is going to lead that category. But with what it's doing with its XE and DG1 and SG1 in that mid-tier, Pat, I think the company has the ability to carve itself out a significant niche and benefit from its humongous customer base and relationships with OEMs and ODMs and cloud providers to start to find a way to become a well-known leader. So, and of course, they covered other areas, automotive and IoT and memory, and the company is making inroads in all those areas, Pat. But my walk away from the day was the roadmap is there, but the execution is going to be what the company is going to be judged upon, and its runway is really 6 to 12 months. People are not going to be patient for a long time. So the sooner Intel can show it's on the right track, the more quickly it can rebound.
Yeah, I walked away feeling better about their technological future. And I put things in 3 buckets, right? There's technology and architecture. There's products, and then there's research, right? This wasn't research day. This was architecture day. This wasn't product launch day either, but I felt better. I felt like they were very humble. They recognized some of the challenges that they had with 10 nanometer and 7 nanometer and showed a good card. When you get down to it, while I buy into Intel's 6 pillars of innovation, transistors are still important. And I think what I was excited to see is that Intel, my assessment, Intel didn't say this, I'm walking away with this, has the highest performance transistor stack out there. So that, to me, when it comes down to the highest performance in the data center and things like performance desktops, I don't know yet what that means in the notebook market. That's going to make a big deal and could make life a little bit more difficult for AMD in workloads that don't necessarily take advantage of multi-core. We're going to have to see, because this wasn't a product announcement, so we don't know for certain. Also, for the future, and this is related to 3D packaging. So, there's 2D, 2.5D, and 3D. And think of 3D as putting logic on logic, being able to fab the right piece of silicon at the right place in the right process, optimizing economics. Now, the challenge has always been, how do I package that and keep the performance high and the power draw low? And I think what Intel showed, and some of the characteristics of what they're doing with a project codename Foveros, was very inspiring. And we could be looking in 5 years completely different at all semiconductors and the way that they're done.
Yeah, that's a solid assessment. And as I promised, you would go a little deeper. I read your analysis, Pat, and some of the comments you put out in the media, and you're always the guy that gets hit by the media when semiconductor companies make big announcements. And fascinating stuff, the 3D chiplets, the transistor leadership. These are areas that, again, it sounds super technical, but in the end, it's performance. It's going to come down to the way we are able to interact, whether it's our workloads in our data centers, or it's the ability to be productive on our machines. And so this is what's going to make the difference, Pat. But for Intel, being able to tell this story, and then I think you said this and I said this, and like reading each other's minds. Everyone's going to watch for execution. Everyone's going to watch and say, okay, you've said the right things. You're saying the right things. Did you do the right things? And did you perform? Because that's been I think the one thing, no matter how good the numbers have been, that have kept people a little bit skeptical. You hit these marks, and I think they're going to be clear for launch, not just on price, but in terms of, regaining wins and growing the TAM.
That's right. And that 10-year view, when you're looking at Foveros, that 5 to 10, I think is important. And we're going to see what TSMC talks about in a couple of weeks at their show. They don't usually talk much, but this is the one time a year they do. So good analysis here. I love semiconductors. It's fun. Let's move into T-Mobile. Gosh, T-Mobile, the company that, at least in the US, years ago, I remember people wanting to avoid, now just overtook AT&T as the number 2 wireless carrier in the United States. Pretty amazing. And I think it has a little to do with AT&T diversifying into content with things like Time Warner, that includes things like HBO and things like that. But I think it's fair to say it's also been T-Mobile moves. One of the biggest moves was T-Mobile buying Sprint, and by the way, buying Sprint at a good time. And without getting too geeky, when it came to 5G, Sprint had the bandwidth at the right places, at the center bands, to complement T-Mobile's high band and low band. The other thing that I know doesn't get a lot of sexiness out there, but I think gave a lot of credibility to T-Mobile, is what it did with 4G and LTE with HSPA Plus, which was a little kicker, a little higher speed that T-Mobile had over a lot of the carriers. And now we're in a position where T-Mobile's number 2. It has low band, mid band, and high band, and they're the first with standalone, which some people refer to standalone as the real 5G, right? It means you have the 5G spectrum going on the outside, and you also have a new backhaul and new back office type of processing where, the true low latency and you get the monster speeds. So I'm thinking that T-Mobile's number 2 position is I think pretty well secured, and maybe it's on to number 1 Verizon. We're gonna have to see. T-Mobile's T-Mobile does super well with consumers. They don't do very well right now with B2B, and that's a huge area of strength for AT&T. And by the way, and Verizon, and not just on the smartphone, but also services like IoT. I personally visited AT&T's IoT, one of their IoT showcase labs in Dallas. One of my compatriots at Moor Insight, Will, he went to Israel to visit what they were doing with IoT there, and it's pretty stunning. So great movement by T-Mobile. They deserve a pat on the back, and boy, I love the way that they stir up that competitive pie, trying to make AT&T and Verizon look like these stuffed shirts while they're out there with pink hats. Their earnings, Daniel and I, you can appreciate this. They do earnings over video, and they really have a fun time with it. So they're definitely the uncola here, which is why they call themselves the uncarrier.
Yeah, I was wondering how the post John Legere era would go. It seems like it's off to a good start. You've covered it well. I'll just make a couple of quick comments. I am a T-Mobile user. My company personally, I've used it for many years. The service is way underrated. I've always thought it was very good, especially if you're a global traveler. Remember when we used to travel? Because Deutsche Telekom provided just such a good global network. I was pretty much never had to worry. While a lot of my compatriots using things like Verizon would have to plan ahead when they get to Europe on how they would stay connected. Not me, never had to worry about it.
Thank you for reminding me about international travel.
Yeah, and we used to do that, remember? We used to actually get on planes and go places. But remember when we were in Hawaii and we ate the cake, the Sprint, the magenta and Sprint cake that was going to make up the mid and high band 5G, which everybody's very excited about. So I'm in watch and wait mode. I think you hit in the head one big thing, Pat. They might have passed AT&T, but if T-Mobile wants to be number 1, their B2B enterprise story needs to improve. It's there. It just needs to be told. And so I'm watching, I'm waiting, and as an enterprise tech guy, that's what I want to see happen next.
Yeah, I love. I can't call this a worst to first, but if you include Sprint in there into the mix, I love it. Let's go into the next topic here. Is the Z15 1-year anniversary, and the Z15 is IBM's mainframe. And you'd be like, wait a second, mainframe. They still make mainframes. Yeah. If you had a credit card transaction, you checked out at a retailer, online or at a store, there's about a 95% chance that transaction went through an IBM mainframe. Big in financial, big in governments, big in retail, and it's still kicking it. And with IBM adding a lot more cloud features, right? From Red Hat, I wake up one morning and we've got Redshift and RHEL on a Z15 on a mainframe. It's amazing, and confidential computing and things like that. But what I want to talk about was its 1-year anniversary. It's funny, financially, right? Does it even make a difference to IBM's financial? Well, it has. Last 3 quarters, IBM Z revenue grew 69%, 59%, and 62%. It was literally the darling of the company. Not to take anything away from Red Hat, that was growing, double digits as well, but this is 60%. And, I want to balance that out. It's very secular, right? When you have a new Z that comes out, it's kind of feast or famine. And boy, was it a feast here. And Daniel, I had the chance to talk to one of what IBM calls a client, right? IBM doesn't call them customers. They call them clients. And I talked to Nationwide Building Society. They're the number 2 largest mortgage processor, mortgage lender in the UK. And he said exactly what I would expect. I'm like, why do you use a Z? Why don't you just go to the cloud and do it somewhere else? He talked about security. He talked about transaction performance. He talked about the rapidly shrinking footprint of what it takes to have a Z15, which was half the footprint, and you can read that into half the power of what it took his Z13 that he had. And don't confuse Nationwide with some boring company that doesn't innovate, right? They were first with almost every new feature in the UK, right? First app. Heck, they have a feature that you and I don't even use, even if we did go to the ATM, which is iris scanning for security. And I thought that meant a lot to me. I think the other things that I'm going to be looking at after this, I think IBM did a great job in laying out the strategy for cloud. That's right. Redshift on a Z15 with cloud packs, but also in the future, by the way, with WASI, which is a full IDE to make it even easier, is confidential computing. This new notion of being completely secure and not even IBM or anybody else having the keys to unlock the data, which, don't be confused. Everybody's confidential computing is not the same. We had IBM's Ross Morey talk about that at the 6.5 Summit, and I loved it. He did it in 12 minutes, a topic that is super technical and super hard to understand. But congratulations to IBM on moving it forward, the 1-year anniversary. It took me years to become a believer in the mainframe. Daniel, I spent 25 years kind of making fun of the mainframe. I was definitely a server bigot. My first role was with NCR in 1990. I had to sell against IBM salespeople at financial institutions. My X80 server against their RS6000 and the previous name of Z, which was the System 360.
Well, the renaissance of the mainframe should not be understated, Pat. And you did dive in pretty deep there. I believe the confluence of cloud and mainframe will serve a very unique yet high value purpose. And by the way, that growth that you mentioned sounds more like Azure than mainframe. And so those numbers are impressive. And despite cyclicality, if that's even a word, the company should be proud. And by the way, should be pleased, because the gross margin contributions that Systems and specifically Z has had to IBM's bottom line performance should also not be understated, because the overall performance would have looked dismal had the Z not been so successful over the last several quarters.
Yeah, by the way, the gentleman at the client was out of the UK, and he corrected me. He's like, "What's a Z15?" I'm like, "Oh, a Z15."
Yeah.
I love it. So let's move into our last topic here, Cisco earnings. And Daniel, I'm going to give you the reins on this so you can cover how they did, their $1 billion cost reduction plan, and maybe even the retirement of their CFO or the departure. What does it mean, Daniel? Tell us.
Well, listen, the big cloud and consumer tech service companies have absolutely smashed it. We saw Amazon's earnings beat by $8.50 a share. The OEMs are a bellwether, though. When you look at what's happening, and over the next few weeks, we had Cisco, and we're going to have HPE, we're going to have Dell, and we're going to get a better sense of what is going on in terms of technology investment in the enterprise and small business ecosystem. Cisco, unlike some of those companies, has a very significant cyclicality related to small businesses buying storage, network, servers, compute, as well as all kinds of different just traditional routers and switches and things that are used in their campuses. They have the collaboration suite. It's a very diverse set of products. Overall, there was kind of two companies here. You had the adjusted earnings. The company did well. The company beat on its revenue. The company beat on its earnings, but these were adjusted numbers. And so as we were starting to see these numbers come in, it's kind of like, was it good or was it good enough? And so the market responded kind of saying it was good enough, but it wasn't good enough. And so the company saw its revenues decline about 9% over the previous year, same quarter. It saw a 5% overall reduction in revenue year over year. Again, a tough year for Cisco. You had headwinds all year. It started off with trade, the trade dilemma with China, which has a big impact on OEMs and the building of products and the ability to deliver products to customers. Then we had coronavirus hit the Eastern Hemisphere. China got shut down. So after we had this trade dispute, then we had the whole country shut down for a period of time. Then it all came here to America. So even though you could kind of say Cisco only had maybe a portion of their year impacted by COVID, if you go back to the trade disputes, almost the entire year for the company was under headwinds, significant headwinds. So when I look at a 5% year over year decline with everything that happened, I give Cisco a lot of credit. Now, it's been backed by a couple areas that I think are specifically important to Cisco right now. Security, the company is now the largest security company on the planet. It saw double-digit growth in the last quarter. And as companies are trying to secure their data centers and their employees and their devices, their business and their networking for the SD-WAN has grown as well. So security, the SD-WAN business, its involvement in 5G, which is proliferating quickly. And Cisco's got a big part at the core of 5G, Pat. And then finally, teams and collaboration, another area. And one other area that I believe Cisco will be leaning into is its applications and analytics. So it bought AppD. That area has grown, but maybe not as much as the company would hope, but it's an area to lean into. And it's a diversification play, Pat, and it's also a margin play for the company. And you mentioned this in your beginning introduction. They're cutting expenses, $1 billion out of the budget. The company committed to its employees throughout this entire time. So meaning that when a lot of other companies could have shown better quarterly results by getting rid of costs, the company decided not to do that. And I give that credit to Chuck Robbins, the CEO, who from day one said, we're not going to do that. And the company really maintains pride in its culture and its ability to deliver. Having said that, Pat, the period of apology or excuse for most tech companies is going to be shortened now. They were kind of on the heels of that. They're seeing Microsoft crush earnings. They're seeing Amazon crush earnings. People want, we're seeing it happen with Dell. We've seen it happen with HPE, and we're seeing it happen with Cisco. People that are behind these companies, they want to see growth. And so this next year, Pat, I'm really thinking growth is going to be the engine. And by the way, Pat, these areas like infrastructure where Cisco saw double-digit declines are going to have to get back on track. But again, I do want to say it wasn't as bad as the numbers. The street was very punitive. And for whatever reason with OEMs, the street has continued to be very punitive, whereas other businesses can show bad, like Lyft loses like $8 billion a quarter. And the street's like, oh, we'll knock the stock down 1%. Cisco hits its revenue within 5%, and the street's like, oh, we're going to drop it, 12%, on the price. So I find that the OEMs always have the hardest time, but they're very important to our ecosystem. And it'll be a bellwether to watch small businesses and large enterprises in their investments in IT pick up, and companies like Cisco will be at the core of that.
Let's go to analysis, Daniel. I want to just add a few very simple thoughts here. A lot less drilled down than yours, which were good. The things I expected to be up were up, and the things that I expected to be down were down. If you look at what the cloud guys are where they're getting their growth from, it's services. It's IaaS, PaaS, or it's SaaS. And when you look at WebEx, Cisco subscriptions, and security, like you said, they were up. Infrastructure and what I heard in the call was, especially on the server side, was down. I'm really interested to compare this to Dell, which is coming up, and also Lenovo, which went earlier in the week. So to me, it's really, this is the balance. This is the balance of infrastructure versus the software and security. And right now, infrastructure is just a whole lot bigger on the Cisco side than it is on X as a service. So that to me is where we're at. Layoffs are terrible, but we're going to see some there. I was surprised that the stock didn't go back up, because Wall Street loves layoffs and cost reductions, but we didn't see that rebound when Chuck was giving the call.
Yeah, well, Pat, those are some great points, and we are at that point where the company is starting to have to make some changes. It has to get its numbers back on track. As I mentioned, I admired the company sticking with its people for as long a period as possible. But, we've got to stay competitive. The health of the whole is the only way that the company can continue to grow and succeed. But, it'll be interesting to watch the next quarter. It's going to be a very, very indicative of our recovery, Pat. I'd still say that these big OEMs are the best indicator of how our overall economy is doing, because they literally serve everything: schools, government, restaurants. I know cloud is a big thing, but cloud is it's just a different path to consumption than a lot of these big OEMs. So good stuff, though. I love these conversations.
Yeah, it is. I'll be honest with you. I don't really care about Cisco stock price or how it does. What I'm concerned with is market share and how they're doing against their comparables. Otherwise, I would have been a financial analyst. But this is great analysis here. It was fun, and for those listeners or viewers who liked what they heard, press that subscribe button. Send it to your friends. We're very thankful for our thousands in the audience. We have a lot of fun. We hope you are too, and maybe even learning some things. And hey, if you have a beef with something we've said, Daniel and I are both on Twitter as well, and you can tweet to us. And if it's doesn't have any expletives, we will respond back to you. So with that, Daniel, I'm going to take us out here. It's great to see you. Until next week, thanks for tuning in.